And now, after years of planning, sweating, and going broke, here is the Boots and Whiskey Podcast with Jim Belisle.
I'll alert the media.
Why they would give this man a podcast is anyone's guess.
Then there is what could only be a bizarre coincidence or something else.
Welcome to the Boots and Whiskey Podcast with Jim Belisle.
Fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life, son.
Country music and fine moonshine. Finally, a podcast that lets it all hang out.
Let's level with America.
Got your boots? Ready for some whiskey?
These boots are made for walking.
One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you.
And now, the Boots and Whiskey Podcast with Jim Belisle.
Hey everyone, Jim here, Boots and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the show. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. We have Ritch Cassidy here on this program. Ritch does Cassidy Country over on the social media platforms. He also runs a radio show that is syndicated all across the country. Dude tells some fucking cool ass stories, man, and he's the kind of cat that we're so honored to be friends with here at this show. He's doing all kinds of cool things. Go check him out on all the socials. We stumbled across him on TikTok, and just like we're so fascinated by the stories that we had to have him on. So big thank you for him and for being here. For those of you that have been keeping track on our socials, we are making a big announcement this weekend coming here in the next few days. So stay tuned for that. We're going to Country Calling this weekend in Ocean City, Maryland. So keep an eye out for all of our posts and everything to go on there. If it's your first time here, welcome. If it's not your first time here, welcome back. Sit back, relax, and enjoy, guys, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Cheers.
Right on. That's the way I like to do that, my brother.
So honestly, I'm not gonna lie to you. My exhaustion got to me after work today. We've been on the fucking go since last Wednesday, and I was just like, I don't know if I can even keep my eyes open, let alone hold the conversation.
Yeah. No, and listen, I get that way too. I have been accused of burning the candle both ends of the candle both ends, for years. And I just found a way to function in 3 to 4 hours of sleep. And now I got 3 little kids later in life. And now it's like, well, I guess I was preparing myself to never sleep. So coffee is my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, thanks for coming on, man. Like I stumbled across you on TikTok. I just love what you're doing. It's so fascinating.
Well, I appreciate it. It was a little bit of trial and error as to what I was going to share, because like everybody, you're on all the socials, and I've been in radio for so long, corporate radio for so long. I had just hours of video and audio of artists that I've interviewed I've been in radio now 28 years. So I started a TikTok on the advice of a friend of mine, and I can give him a plug. He's Brandon McDermott, Fat Daddy, as he's called. He's a food guy. He's got like 1 million followers. Well, he joined it during the pandemic, and he just loved it. He's another radio guy. He actually has shadowed us for a while when I was working, so I'm a few years older than him. But he kept telling me, he's like, you got to get on TikTok and share your country music stories and share your knowledge and your history of it. So I started one, I want to say last spring, so a year ago. And I was just all over the place. I was sharing goofy ones that I would share on radio station sites and things like that, not really focused on anything, right? Because they say you have to have your niche where people come back to it. And then I happened to post one just telling a story. I think it's one of the first ones, I think, on this run of 175 that I do, a story about a writer. And the response was just crazy. People were like, do you tell those often? And I'm like, okay, well, maybe we'll do that. So I did about 30 of them last fall. And then I had we had our third little baby in close like to the first of the year. And so I had stopped doing them for a while. And I'm like, you know what? And And I got to be honest with you, I had a ton of traction on these 60. I went in and I dumped them. I dumped every single one of them and I started over. So now what you see on the Cassidy Country is, there was a point where I did 100 days in a row, and then I took a couple days off. So, so I guess I found my thing, and it's really kind of what I've done my entire life is I always tell people, I don't have many hobbies. As you can tell, I didn't play D1 football. I'm not an athlete in any sense of the imagination. I drank for enough years where it was like I was trying out for the pros and realized that I was never going to get out of the minors. So I had to give that up. And my hobby is country music. It has been since I was a kid. So when I do read a book, have time to sit down and read a book, I'll read a book, biography about a country star. I'm always researching. And with my connections over the years, I thought, you know what, this might be a good opportunity for me to share these stories because friends of mine that just sit in our circle, that's what we used to do, sit around, drink beer, and just share stories. So finding a way to do that and make it compelling enough for people was a challenge. It's a start for me. So I decided that I was overthinking it. Like you can't overthink it. You just got to do what you do, how you do it. And if people come along, they come along. So those videos you watch, I do them all in one take. I literally figure out the song I'm going to talk about. I might jot down 3 or 4 bullet points. But I know the story in my head. And then what I do is then I try to relay that story how I would speak. So you'll see if you go through some of the playlist, there are some of these where I'm the first comment and they're going, oh, I got this date wrong, or oh, I got this something wrong. Because my mind is, I always tell people I got 2 brain cells and they fight constantly. And so sometimes I'm thinking what I'm saying before I actually think about it. So I know I get a few minute facts wrong, but I enjoy it. And people ask me, why are these longer? I think the longest one I ever did was 8.5 minutes or something like that. I don't set out to make them long. I set them out. Some of them are longer because I feel like the stories need to be told.
Sure.
And so people that message me and say, too long, get to the point. I tell them, there's that old saying, this isn't an airport. You don't have to announce your departure. I don't care. Just scroll. Right. It doesn't matter. Yeah. So I look at this and I did this on one of my nightly TikTok lives. I said, when I do these, it's a lot like my years in radio. Because when I started in radio at a young age, I worked overnights. So I'd work 11 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning. And every once in a while, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, you'd get a phone call. Back when radio stations got a lot of phone calls, you'd get a phone call from an elderly man or an elderly woman who couldn't sleep. And they turn their radio on. And next thing you know, I'm the one that they're listening to and they're spending time with at 4 o'clock in the morning, that their kids no longer are around. They don't come around much. They don't have a spouse. Maybe they're widowed. And at an early age, that really resonated with me because I was like, that's the power of radio and video and things like that. Is it's not for the people that go front row for a John Party, Morgan Wallen concert because they can get their content anywhere. Right. It's sharing the stories one-on-one with people that might, number one, not ever know the story. Number two, like to take those stories and then share them with other people, which I just think is great. I get messages from people all the time. They go, I was at a party and I told that story about how you said this. But more than that then is the people that maybe just live by themselves and, want to be entertained in a way that's not all flashy, right? Because you'll see a lot of creators. You'll see a lot of creators online where they show a lot of the pictures and they show this and show that. You have to remember, and you know this about me, I come from the world of radio. I was never in TV. So for me, it was always theater of the mind. That's radio. Yeah. So for me, I don't care if people set the phone down or put it on their computer and they're just listening to it. It's nothing about the mug, right? Or it's nothing about me walking back and forth in my kitchen at 4 in the morning telling a story. As long as they hear it. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of, so once they took off, I was like, okay, well, maybe we're on to something. And so then you kind of put pressure on yourself, right? So then I kind of started putting pressure on myself, like, man, these really got to be like, I'm trying to think, okay, what else can I do to them and all this? And I had heard from a good friend of mine who is a consultant for a lot of these things that I've known just over the years. And he had called me to tell me how much he loved them. He works in the country music business. And he said, man, don't change it. He said, don't change a thing. He says, you're overthinking it. He said, just do them how you do them. The people that are there that like them are going to like them, and they're going to tell their friends about them. People that don't know about them, they may like them, they may go, but you'll make more back tenfold if you just keep them the way that you do them. So that's how I do them. So that's how I came up with it. And it literally is just a vast, I have been accused of being the redneck Ryan Seacrest and redneck Rain Man for decades. Comedian Pauly Shore was the one that christened me redneck Ryan Seacrest.
You know,
About 17 years ago, we were on the air, and he says, you're redneck Ryan Seacrest. And so now all these people call me redneck Ryan Seacrest.
it's one of those things where it's like, for me, right, I love what you do because I love the story, right? I love the story. For me, growing up, history was always a big thing for me. Like, my degrees in history and stuff, like, I always loved the story, right? I
Right.
don't give a shit if it's true, false, somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
If you can tell a good story, you've got me, right? And, and that's kind of why I started this the way I do it. Like, I tell my guests all the time, usually they're artists or whatever, and it's like, we may not get to talk about music because, honestly, and it sounds bad, but like, I don't give a shit. I don't care that
Mhm.
you have music or have music coming out. Like, I want to know
Right.
about you and who you are,
Right.
right? Because, again, you tell somebody your story and it's fascinating enough. If you have some sort of art form, 9 times out of 10, people are going to go to that art form and say, let's check this out.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. And I think most, you would hope that most that listen don't take everything you say, meaning me, as Bible. You know what I mean?
right.
Like if I
Yeah.
say something, if somebody calls me out on something, I'm like, great, awesome. That's the
Right.
story that I know. That's the story that I researched. And I have been fact checked on a few of them, but I mean, not that often. And they haven't been that far off to make the ending of the story any different, if that makes
Right.
any sense. I,
Right.
so one of the other things I just started doing, again, because people enjoy these stories. So I did Cassidy Country on TikTok, and I've been on Facebook like everybody since I think 2007 or 6, 7, whenever you could go public on it. Because in radio, in corporate world, they were like, you got to get on Facebook, you'll grow listeners and all this stuff. So I've had my Facebook forever. And so I've decided to start kind of migrating some of them over there, but they don't get, algorithms are crazy over there. So you don't get as
Yeah.
many hits or whatnot. So I decided what I was going to do. I have been hounded, and I say this in the most loving way. I've been hounded for years by my father to write a book because so many people say that I have such a Forrest Gump story. I have
Yeah.
been in the weirdest places with the most popular people in the world, and some of it is just by happenstance, right? So what I started doing now on my Facebook, on my Ritch Cassidy, not my radio one, not my radio station one, which is RC Social Saloon, shameless plug. I've started typing out memories of what was going on. 2 reasons. Number one, if I decide to compile a book, I can go back and just take those off and put them away. Number two, it helps me remember, I'm getting up there. So it helps me remember how it was. And so I've been going through all these pictures and all this stuff. Like this morning at 6:30 this morning, I shared a story. And I've shared this on my live before as well. Blake Shelton was brand new in 2001. Austin had just come out in April of 2001. And by August of 2001, it was number 1 for 5 weeks. And so he was coming through town. We had booked him to do a show in December of that year. And so we were trying to figure out, who was going to interview him on the air and all this stuff. Well, come to find out they wanted me to interview him. I was doing afternoons. Okay, great, perfect. So I had about a week to figure out, okay, how am I going to make this memorable for me, the listener, and hopefully Blake Shelton, right? He's a new artist. I want him to remember who I am. I want him to remember the radio station, everything. So I started thinking, and I thought, well, he's from Ada, Oklahoma, which is a small town. 2001, there were still, yellow pages around or what have you. So I'm like, well, maybe I'll just get on Google and see if I can't find a phone number in Ada and see if somebody knew Blake growing up, because he left Ada when he graduated high school at 17. So I got on and I Googled, and first thing comes up is Ada High School. Well, I didn't know if there was one or two schools in Ada, but I just called the one that I got the number for. Receptionist answered, and I said, hi, my name is Ritch Cassidy. I'm calling from a radio station. Did Blake Shelton attend school there? And she said, yes, he did. And I said, well, I'm trying to get some, not dirt, but I'm trying to get some fun stories to ask him, on the radio. Do you mind talking to me? And I'm going to roll some tape on it. And she starts laughing. She says, yes. And she just talks about how everybody just loved him. He was just a funny little kid, a young kid, and all this other stuff, and great disposition and all this stuff. I said, okay. I said, is there anybody else there that I can talk to? And she said, you need to talk to his favorite teacher, Mr. Truitt. It was his shop teacher. I said, great, I'd love to. So she patches me through to Mr. Truitt, and he picks up the phone, and he's an elderly man. I would imagine 24 years later, he's not alive, but he sounded about 100 years old on the phone when I talked to him. He picks up the phone, and elderly, and he says, Mr. Truitt speaking. I said, Mr. Truitt, my name is Ritch Cassidy. I go through the whole thing. I said, I'd like to ask you a few questions about one of your former students, Blake Shelton. And he lets out this belly laugh. Oh, he just thought it was great. So he and I sit here and we talk a little bit. And I said, tell me a little bit about Blake, what he did. So he tells me about how Blake always wore flannel shirts to school every day of the year. He goes, I don't know why, but he always wore flannel. He says, number two, he always sang Christmas songs in the hallway. Every day, all year long, to the point where teachers and fellow students would go, Blake, sing something else. And Blake would be walking through the hallway in May singing I'll Be Home for Christmas. And so we had a good laugh about that. So then finally I had asked Mr. Truitt towards the end of our conversation, I said, Mr. Truitt, did you ever dream that Blake Shelton was going to become this big old star? And Mr. Truitt, in his great accent, I wish I could emulate. I used to be able to. But he just goes, boy, I tell you what, if that old boy wasn't going to sing, he's going to starve to death. And I howled, right? So I just laugh. And I just think that's great. So you fast forward a week later, and Blake Shelton comes in. He comes in for the interview, and we get talking. Like you got to cover the music, but yet you want to get to know them more, and you want to know about them and kind of ask them questions that they don't normally get asked, right? Because you ask any artist you talk to, they get the same questions all the time. Where are you from? When did you start playing music? How do you write your songs? Best place you ever played? Whatever. Like there's like a random, and I still to this day hear people that have been in radio for over 30 years and they ask the same bland questions. So Blake comes in and I kind of ask him these questions, but I get him out of the way as quick as I can. And I said, Blake, can I ask you something? And mind you, we're live on the air. And I said, Blake, can I ask you something? And he says, yeah. I said, what did you used to sing walking the hallways of your high school? He kind of looks at me. He goes, well, what do you mean? I said, every day you'd walk from class to class. Were there songs that you would think of that you would just sing from class to class? And he goes, well, now that you think about it, and he says, I think I sing Christmas songs every day of the year. And I go, correct answer. Listen to this. And I hit play. And Mr. Truitt, then his voice, right? So then it turns into Blake Shelton, This Is Your Life. And his eyes get really wide. And on the air, he goes, is that Mr. Truitt? I said, it's Mr. Truitt. So he just loves it. So he starts going through all these memories and all this stuff. And so we talk a little bit more, and I talk about Ada, and he gives me memories and all this stuff. And then finally, at the end of it, I said, did you ever think you were going to become a big old star in country music? Again, he was just starting out. But I said, do you ever think you were going to be a big old star in country music? And he says, never. And I said, another good answer. That's exactly what Mr. Truitt said. And I played that whole, if that boy wasn't going to sing, he's going to starve to death. Oh, my God. Blake just howled. And he said, this might be the coolest interview I've ever done in my life. And so we get done, we go to the show, and then after the show, they didn't have to be at the next venue, and it wasn't that far. I don't know how far they had to travel, but he wanted to party. So we got a friend of mine. I can actually show you the picture here in my little studio here. I got to take the phone off. If I lose you, I'll be right. I'll be back on. So let me. I should be able to turn this around, can I? I don't know here.
Yeah, you should be able to.
I'll just hold it up here. I'm not phone savvy, so let me turn the light around on it. So here we are at. This is about 5:45 in the morning. Saturday morning. We rolled up in his tour bus to my buddy Dan's house. And you can tell how old the picture is. It's an old Milwaukee light can. That's the old logo from 20 some odd years ago. And there were just about 20 of us, and Blake became like our buddy. And so then about 2:00 in the morning, he and I found a pair of guitars. And next thing you know, he and I are in the back room of my buddy's house, and we're going shot for shot. Not drinking shot for shot, playing songs, playing our favorite classic country songs of all time. I'm going to have to turn the light on to show you this. But so yeah, sat in there and we were singing George Jones and Johnny Paycheck and all that. So anyway, that after he did the show and all that, I had a poster from the show, and you can't read it backwards, but he had written, "Rich, thanks for the coolest interview ever, Blake Shelton." So I had that.
Awesome.
So they had framed that for me. And then he came back a year later, and I don't know if I shared that on my channel or not. God, I got a lot I got to share. I had this phone call from CMT. Well, that's another story in itself, but CMT was sending me scripts to audition for shows. And they said, next time an artist comes through, if you can, interview him and all that stuff. Well, by that time, it had only been about a year since I had talked to Blake. So he was coming through again. This is The Baby had just went #1. And I said, "Hey, would you help me out?" And he said, "Yeah, what's up?" And I said, I got this request from CMT to do an artist interview show. Can we roll some tape on your bus of me just asking you questions? And he's like, "Yeah, sure." So we go on, and of course we're drinking, and I mean, it just goes sideways, but it's just us just randomly talking. And I still have that VHS tape. I had it on YouTube for years, and then I think I hid it, but I may have to post that. So, but
Awesome.
I don't know if you have that question or not, but no, I've not talked to Blake in a number of years. God, it's been a few years since I've talked to him. But so anyway, back to the Forrest Gump lifestyle. I hit radio at the right time, I feel, because all the superstars now, all the ones that are the megastars, are all the guys that I knew that didn't have a record deal.
Yeah.
So I would see them all the time at country music functions, and or they would come through when they were trying to get a deal, or maybe they were just coming out. So we were very lucky to get to know these guys and kind of build rapport with them. Most radio DJs will always say, "Hey, it's my friend, it's my buddy." Well, you kind of are, but you're more acquaintances than you are friends. But
Right.
we all have those certain ones that are our friends in the business. I consider Dierks Bentley a very good friend of mine. I've known Dierks since 2003, right before he recorded his debut album. And then I wrote an article about him in Country Weekly, which I just found that article the other day. And he called me. He's like, "Man, that's so nice." He's like, because he hadn't had like a review yet of his music. And so I had written it. I got asked to write an article about him. And since that day, and I'm not kidding, since that day, if he's within driving distance or whatever, he'll call me and he'll say, hey man, I'd love to see you. And, it might be 20 minutes, it might be 2 hours before the show, but we catch up. I just saw him last October, November. And just me and him, we just sat and just talked about kids and everything else. And yeah, he's just amazing. He's one of these guys, if you want to talk country music, he's one of these guys that's always just been status quo and just kind of flown under the radar. Like he's never nominated
Yeah.
for anything and all that stuff. And I don't know that really is his thing. Like, I don't know that he cares, but he just puts out consistently just great music. And I just love it.
It's funny because it's funny you mentioned Dirks because Dirks is one of my like all-time favorite country artists. Like I saw him, he might have been one of the very first country shows outside of like a mega star like a Kenny Chesney that I ever saw. That I actually went out of my way to, not out of my way in a bad way, but like decided to go to. And I saw him on the Ridge tour when he put out the Bluegrass album all those years ago now, and he was playing with the Traveling McCourys. I can never fucking say their name right. Um, and he played in a very small venue up here, and it was great. Like after
Yeah.
the show, like we were front row, and after the show was over, like he took the time to talk to everybody. And was like, what did you think of this? What did you think of that? How did this sound? How did that sound? And it was like,
Yeah.
artists don't do that, like,
Right.
because they don't need to, but like
Right.
I have very rarely missed a Dirk show every time he's come up here because it's just, it's just great. And because, like you said, like he is exactly who you would imagine him to be.
Right. He has no ego. I know a friend of mine who passed away a year ago. His name is Matt, passed away from cancer, but Matt was one of the cameramen for the Nashville Predators. And one night he was in house doing the game, and he texts me and he says, he goes, "Oh my God, dude!" He says, "Dirks and his family sitting right down by me." I'm like, "Man, just go up and say hi to him." I said, "I guarantee you he'll say hi to you." And he's like, "No." And I'm like, "Yeah, go say hi to him." He goes, "Can I say that I know you?" I'm like, "Dude, it ain't going to matter." I mean, he's going to go, unless he sees me. Like, I don't know that he would know it was if he said my name. So he's like, "Okay." And sure enough, like an hour later, he texts me back. He's like, "Dude, in between periods, I went up and just shook his hand and talked to him. He says it was the coolest thing ever. He said he would be on my podcast because my buddy had started a podcast about his life. He was a sports guy for years. He was on television and all this other stuff. And then he got into production and he filmed the Olympics and all this other stuff. But then he got cancer at 52 and passed away. But he had asked Dirks, he said, "Hey, I'd love to have you on my podcast to talk about hockey and country music and all this other stuff, if you don't mind." And Dirk says, "Yeah, give me a call anytime." Then he passed away. So he couldn't. So, but yeah, so what you're saying is 100% true. And my buddy was able to learn that firsthand as well.
You know what I love about this, and like talking to a guy like you, and being on this side of it, and having the insight I've been able to have because I've been able to do some cool shit. Not like you, like at all, but like I've had, I've had my run-ins and my elbows and all that.
Yeah,
But
right.
and I've started to talk a little more openly about it especially with other artists. Um, in your time doing this, right? Do you have moments that like kind of like stick out in your brain where you were like, well, I met so and so and I was expecting something different. Like I'm a little disappointed of you don't have to name names or whatever, but like have you ever had those moments?
I can, yeah, sure. I mean, and I've mentioned this on the live too. It's not that I don't like this guy. I've just never had, and not even a good time with him. It's not even accurate because he's been fine. But Josh Turner is one that I've just never been able to crack. Like you can cut jokes with people and you can kind of let loose and kind of let your guard down. And I think Josh is so, I don't know, maybe he's an introvert. I don't know, but he just always, because I'll tell you, and one of the first times I learned that was, so not long after Blake, and I did that whole This Is Your Life, I thought, this is great. Like, this is my new shtick. This is my thing. These new artists come through. I'm going to call their hometowns. I'm going to get some info on them. We're going to play This Is Your Life. It's going to be great. So not long after Blake Shelton came through, Daryl Worley came through. I got phone numbers from people that knew Daryl. I talked to his cousin who was catching a flight to Vegas. So I played all this stuff for Daryl Worley, and Daryl just thought it was great. I mean, Daryl just loved it. So Josh Turner was coming through, sold out show, Long Black Train, had spent however many weeks at #1. I mean, he's the man. And I love all of his music. I love everything he's done. So he comes in and I do the whole thing. Like I had gotten people talking, people we went to high school with and all this other stuff. So I'm asking him questions, again, we're live on the air and I'm asking him questions. And I say, hey, didn't you guys, must be, how did I phrase it? Something to the effect of, must beat those days growing up when you used to go mudding. And he kind of looks at me almost as somebody would say, like, how do you know that? Right?
Yeah.
And I go, well, I'm sure you probably went mudding, because where is he from? He's from one of the Carolinas, I think. Doesn't matter. And he kind of, and I said, you guys probably did that kind of stuff growing up, right? And he says, yeah, every once in a while. Like, okay. And so again, radio, right? Doesn't make for good radio. Like you want to keep people talking. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, I heard you used to go mudding quite a bit. And I go, I don't even know if I knew the girl's name, somebody that he went to high school with. And I said, that's not, this is what I heard. Boom, I play it live on the air. And I always had like one of those, before I started working network and having my own studio in my house, I'd have all the interns in the studio with me. So they'd be my crowd, they'd clap and all that stuff. Yeah. So I'm playing the clip from the girl and they're all clapping, they're laughing and everything like this. And he's just stone-faced and he's listening. And I go, yeah. I go, so apparently whatever her name is, I said, yeah, she's a, and he just goes, I don't remember her.
Oh boy.
Okay. All right. And I probably had like 3 or 4 more clips that I was going to play. And then I was just like,
yeah.
So yeah. So as far as artists like that I've met backstage, most have been pretty genuine. And the ones that weren't, it's that old story that sometimes sounds like an excuse, but they were just having a bad day. Like later on, I'd see them and they'd be great. I did during the pandemic when I transitioned from corporate to network radio and I was working from the house. I decided during COVID, nobody was touring. Everybody was home. Like they couldn't go out and play a show. So I started going through all the names of people that I knew. And I'm like, hey, why don't we do an online interview show? Well, and that's how my name of my radio show came to be, RC Social Saloon. That's what we called it online. And my very first guest I ever had on was not a country star. I randomly one day sent an email to William Hung, who was on American Idol. Remember him? She bangs.
Yeah.
And, he works like an IT now or something. And so he was kind of skeptical about the whole thing, but he did it. And so that kind of, I got my lighting right. And I kind of figured out, the flow of the show, thanks to William Hung. But I just started getting people on the show. And I was just doing interviews kind of like this. And we were, and I had, who did I have on there? James Otto, who just got started in Loving You and wrote in pictures, Art in Color. Jeannie Seeley, who just passed away. What's his name? Don McLean, who did American Pie. T.G. Shepherd, Ronnie McDowell. I mean, all these legends I had on. Gary Chapman. And so that's kind of then where it kind of actually, now that I think about it, I never thought about this, but it's kind of the reason why now I do these legendary stories is because I gravitated towards these legendary artists because they're more pure and more passionate about loving that somebody wants to talk about their music, right?
Yeah.
I got a call to do an interview with William Lee Golden of the Oak Ridge Boys. And for those unfamiliar with who he is, he's the one with the big long gray beard. And I have to be honest with you, I love the Oak Ridge Boys growing up, but I didn't know much about him. So I'm like, yeah, I'll have him on, tomorrow at 2:00, whatever it is. I was working at home at the time still. And so I just crash course, went online, read his bio and whatnot. He became one of my closest confidants. Like we talked for 2.5 hours from his family cabin. That's where he was at the time that his grandparents built, and he's in his 80s.
Yeah.
And he and all of his siblings were born there. like legit born there.
Oh yeah,
The doctor that delivered him was Dr. Tippin. Years later, would find out that was Aaron Tippin's grandfather. So he tells me all these stories. So the next thing you know, he writes a book. He sends it to me. I read it. I write this big review about it online. Then I have him back on. So he and I really got a rapport. And then the other one I got a really good rapport with was T. Graham Brown. T. Graham Brown and I just really hit it off, and I had him on like 3 or 4 times. So I think, to get back to your question about the ones that maybe are having an off day or they're not as what I pictured them to be, it's not that I will turn down interviews with these new artists. I just know a lot of times the majority of them can't hold a candle to an interview and a chat with these legendaries, because all these young stars are conditioned for numbers, followers, hits, collaborations, all this other stuff that sometimes can come off as not genuine. Whereas the older stars, I mean, they'll tell you everything. They'll tell you whatever you want to know. You know, T.G. Shepherd, that many people know the story of him. You know, he had a big song called Devil in the Bottle. He was an ad executive writing commercials. But at 17 years old, he met Elvis. And so he tells me this whole story, and I'm transported into this T.G. Shepherd being 17. And this is all stuff I didn't expect. Like, I got on there to talk about legendary music and playing the Opry. And he tells me the whole story about being 17, meeting Elvis renting out a bowling alley, and then them going roller skating and playing bowling and all this stuff. And then they became best friends. I mean, you can't put a price tag on that. Like, I just loved it. It was pretty amazing. So I respect and I love, people will ask me what I think of today's country music, and I love it. Because country music is all generational. It's not 90s country, which was mine when I was in college. It's not Randy Travis, which was mine when I was a kid in the early 80s, or Ronnie Millsap or Kenny Rogers. It doesn't bother me, because everything, it all changes. Country music has a 10-year pendulum that swings, and there's always a new sound that comes around. And many believe now that Zach Top is going to change that pendulum again to be that classic country sound,
Yeah. It's funny, because when I first started this thing, like, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I still don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I had thrown it out there on Instagram, and I was like, is there anybody that wants any artists out there that want to tell their story? And this guy named Ray McDonald reached out to me, and he said, hey, like, I grew up next to Merle Haggard. I ended up being his tour bus driver, the whole nine, right? And now I'm brand new at this, and I'm like, this guy is so full of shit.
Right. Yeah, you don't know what to take. Yeah.
Right. So he goes, I wrote a book about it, and he goes, he sent me all this stuff that was like, I'm not pulling your leg. And this is well before I started doing video and all that. And the stories he had about Merle were just like, holy shit. Like,
right.
This guy, you can't make this up, right? And then he had sent me his book, and I'm not much of a reader, but I read a good chunk of it. And it was like, this is, you hear Merle Haggard's bus driver, like, oh, big deal, right? But like the stories those guys can tell, the stories that the guys that are behind the scenes can tell, like, those are the ones, as you know, right? The older guys and girls, they want to talk, because, not to put too fine a point on it, but they're also hitting more mortality too. They want those stories to get out there. And
absolutely,
it might have been episode 3 or 4 or whatever of this, and it's one of my favorites, because it was just so unbelievable. And so, like, I was, one heartbeat away from Merle Haggard over the phone. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I saw it.
Yeah.
It was, and it was just
absolutely
mind-blowing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I have found I've probably done thousands upon thousands of interviews in my life, and I've always found the ones, it's something weird inside me, but it's always the ones either I don't have time to do, I don't know anything about them,
Yep.
or I don't feel like doing it.
Yep.
Usually end up being one of my all-time favorite ones.
Yeah.
Right.
And
I can be really, I can be really amped up for one, but it's like you already hit that plateau. It's like you're just coming down when you're doing it. But if you go into it like, okay, well, I got to do this, and then you're like, holy cow! So then I'm sharing stories with people, going, "Did you know X, Y, Z, and this and that and everything else?" And so then so those are the ones that I really hold on to.
My other favorites are the, I hate to use this terminology, but like the Nepo babies, where they're either somebody's kid or grandkid or whatever, like one of my favorite conversations I ever had was with Jesse Keith Whitley.
With who? You broke up.
Oh, sorry, with Jesse Keith Whitley.
Oh yeah.
Jesse and I had become pretty close, pretty good friends, and then like even John Paycheck. I got his PR team sent me a whole list of things don't talk about, and I said fuck you, and I talked about because it's like
right.
we're not gonna not talk about the elephant in the room. Like, sorry, not gonna happen.
Right.
And
that's funny you say Jesse Keith, because no, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, when you do it like this and can connect with people, as like if you can connect with somebody, whether they want to talk or not, they will.
Right. Anybody that knows me knows Keith Whitley is my end all do all. Like that's my pinnacle of what a country music singer is, and followed my entire life, and I've read every book about it. And I've shared this story before, and I think it's on my playlist on my TikTok at Cassidy Country. And I'll be brief about it because I don't want to go too deep in the weeds on it. But I was working one Saturday. It was some random Saturday about 15 years ago. No, probably longer than that, closer to 20. Regardless, I was working one random Saturday, and I was between songs, and the anniversary of Keith's death was coming up. So this might have been like April, and May 9th was coming up. And so I went online. So it's playing music, and it's kind of laid back on a Saturday at radio station. So I'm online and I'm looking stuff up, Keith Whitley, to kind of write out my montage that I was going to do. And I see this link that says Keith Whitley Entertainment. And I'm thinking, well, great, they can answer some questions for me. So I click on it, and it's, it tells me a little bit about what they do and, the history, whatnot. It has a phone number. And so I'm like, I'll just call the number, right? So I dial it up and I hit record, probably more so just so I wouldn't forget if somebody tells me something or whatever. So I hit record, and about third ring in, I get this, hello. And they don't answer it, Keith Whitley Entertainment. They answer it, hello. And I go, hi, my name is Ritch Cassidy. I'm calling from a radio station. I said, sorry, this is random. I said, but I was trying to reach out to Keith Whitley Entertainment. Is this Keith Whitley Entertainment? He says, yes, sir. I said, oh, hi. Can I ask you a few questions about him? And he says, hang on a second. Let me shut the tractor off. I go, what? And he says, what's your name again? And I said, my name is Ritch. And he says, hi, Ritch. How are you? He says, my name is Dwight Whitley. It was his brother. It would be Jesse's uncle.
Yeah.
So now you've got to be kidding me. Seriously, I'm talking Dwight Whitley? So as the radio station's going on, I put, most people probably know this, but if you're listening to the radio station, those things between songs where the voice guy goes, you're listening to Rooster 103.1, whatever they're called, sweepers. So I heard him just start throwing sweepers in where I'm supposed to talk, because I'm not going to hang up on Dwight Whitley or put him on hold. So now I'm freaking out. So now you've interviewed 100 people. You know this. I'm starting to think of questions on the fly, like, oh my God, I got him on the phone. I don't know how long I have him on the phone. We must have talked for 45 minutes, and he told me, stuff that you wouldn't know in a book about Keith Whitley.
Right.
About how his demons got him at an early age because their house burnt down and on Christmas Day, and then his uncle died, and then their brother Randy died, and all this stuff. And then we got into his drinking. We talked about it. His brother told me that he never saw him drunk. He says, it's hard to believe. He says, I never saw him drunk. He says, I saw him drink. He says, but I never saw him drunk. He says, Keith Whitley drank. He says, my brother drank on his own. He says, because he was so ashamed of it that he had those demons that he would drink on his own. And so we talk about that. We talk about his mother. Their mother, Faye, was still alive at the time. And he talked about how I asked him, I said, so Dwight, I said, do you guys still have all the Keith stuff? Again, being the uber Keith Whitley fan I am. And he said, and I said, do you still have all that Keith stuff? And he says, well, Rich, that's a sad story. He said, somebody came out to the house in Sandy Hook, Kentucky. He said, and sweet talk my mom into saying they're opening a museum in Las Vegas. And she gave this guy everything at Keith Whitley's. And the guy took off and he sold it like for premium high dollar around the world. So they only had like a few things left that they have in Sandy Hook there. But by the end of the conversation, he says, you know, my mother still lives in that house. And I kind of make the joke. And I say, does she still have Keith's room set up, you know, from like when he was 14, 15 years old, when he left to join Ralph Stanley and Ricky Skaggs, you know, touring the world on bluegrass? He goes, yep, she does. He goes, everything is up from when he was a teenager. He says, matter of fact, he says, I'm going to talk to my mother this afternoon. He says, again, this was like April in the year, whatever year it was. He says, by the end of the year, I want you to come out the house, fly out to Sandy Hook. He says, I'll pick you up. He says, I want you to spend the night in Keith's room. He goes, we even still have his pajamas. You can sleep in his pajamas. And I never did, but I think about that. And so then he talked about, again, this was all just random. And so then talked about, at the time, they were developing a movie about his life. The actor Brian Keith, if you were to Google him, you know who he is. His face, a recognizable face. Brian Keith knew the Whitley family, played bluegrass, and he was from Kentucky, so he would always play bluegrass with them. Loved Keith, loved the story, so he had adapted a screenplay, played it for the Whitley family, or read it, gave it to the Whitley family to read. They loved it. They greenlit it, and then nothing happened with it. Because I told Dwight, I said, if anybody deserves the big screen treatment, it's Keith Whitley because of all of his demons and what went on behind the scenes and all this other stuff.
Right.
But you talk about Jesse. I had tried for years trying to get Jesse on my podcast, on my video cast, and it just never worked out schedule-wise for him or me or whatever. And we had met a few messages. But I went to my parents and I went out. Oh, God dang, this was 10, 12 years ago. And we were walking to Tootsie's, and I'm across the street, and I look over, and I go, holy shit, that's Jesse Keith Whitley. And my wife and my parents look at me like, who? You know, and I run across the street, and I go, Jesse. He kind of looks at me. You know, we'd been bar hopping. Jesse. So I like pour my heart out to him. I'm like, you know, oh my God, your dad was the greatest, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Can we take a picture? He's like, yeah, I don't care. So we take a picture there on Lower Broadway. And so he says, well, hey, we're doing a charity thing right here inside Tootsie. So we went in, you know, they passed the can around. We all give money to the charity, whatnot, listen to him and play. And yeah, it was great. So that's the closest I've ever gotten to old Jesse.
You know, it's funny you say that because, you know, like for a while there, Jesse and I were texting back and forth and keeping in contact and all that stuff. And then I had noticed Lori was coming to Mohegan Sun because we're up in Massachusetts, and so Lori was playing Mohegan Sun in Connecticut, and T Graham was opening. And I said, you know, Jesse, like I shot him a text. I was like, hey, I just saw Mom's coming up here, you know, because like that's how I talk to these people. Like I'm not, you know, because that's who it is. It's Mom, right? And I was like, I don't want you to do anything. If you can just give me a name, a number, an email, whatever, like I'd appreciate it. So he goes, yeah, sure. He goes, you know, here's some names, here's some emails, here's some numbers, right? Just tell them I sent you. So I shoot a couple emails, shoot a couple texts. I don't hear anything. Now it's the week of the show, and I text Jesse back, and I'm like, listen, I'm not trying to be a pain in the ass. I'm not asking for anything. I know Mom's got a lot going on because it was shortly before her husband died. I was like, I just want to see the show. You know, that's it. You know? So he goes, okay, he goes, here's a direct line to her TM. And I was like, perfect. Shoot him a text, nothing. I was like, all right. So it was like the day before the show, and Jesse goes, hey, you're all set to see Mom tomorrow night. And I was like, and I took it as like a question, like, are you all set? And I was like, well, I didn't hear from anybody. It's not a big deal. Like, thank you for your help, whatever. And he goes, no, I'm telling you, you're all set to see Mom tomorrow night. I was like,
Just
oh,
show
cool.
up.
Right. So I show up. I, going through this, like, even though I'm not in Nashville, like, I hear all the chatter. I know enough people where I know what's going on behind the scenes. I know she's not doing meet and greets. I know she's not doing this, that, and the other thing. And that's cool. Like, I understand, all that. So I get up to the will call, and I give him my name, and the lady gives me an envelope, and it's got 2 tickets and 2 like after show passes. I'm like, this is weird. And like an hour later, I'm sitting at the bar outside the venue, and Jesse goes, hey, did you get your tickets yet? I was like, yeah. And I was like, he goes, did you get what else was in the envelope? I was like, yeah. I go, what the fuck is this? And he goes, I asked Mom to do me a favor. And I was like, he goes, it's just going to be you. He goes, it's going to be quick, and that's it. And I was like, fine. So I got to meet Lori and say hi, and give her kind of like one of those side hugs, and it's one of those things where it's like, I'll never forget it as long as I live.
Right. I've never met Lori, but I interviewed her on the radio. And next time you talk to Jesse, this is 100% true, and I'm sure he probably doesn't know this story, but her and I were talking. We were in the middle of a conversation, and I was pre-recording it. Whenever they would call on the phone, when they call on the phone, I always pre-record it to play at a later date. When they're live in studio, I just because you can control it better. And so I'm recording the call, and she's talking to me, and you can tell that she pulls her mouth away from the phone, and she goes, "Get back here!" And she keeps talking. She's trying to keep her train of thought. She says, "Get back here." She keeps talking, and I'm kind of going, okay. Which reminded me of something else I'll tell you real quick. But so she keeps saying that, and I'm just kind of listening to her, and finally she just yells, "Will you get back here?" She screams it, and she goes, "Sorry, I gotta go," and she hangs up the phone on me. So I keep rolling tape, and I'm like, well, there was Lori Morgan, blah, 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 And so no idea what was going on. About 10 minutes later, my hotline rings again, and I can't think of her name. One of her handlers, Stacy or something, called me, and she said, "Hi, this is Stacy with Lori Morgan. I am so sorry she cut that short. Is there anything else you needed?" And I said, "No, but is she okay?" And she goes, "Oh, yeah, she's fine. Her dog just ran away." I'm like, well, if that ain't country. She starts laughing.
Yeah,
she goes, "But we were able to catch him, so we're all good." But I'm like, yep, there's my claim to fame. Lori Morgan's dog ran away when I was on the air with her. But yeah, this takes me back. I'm sorry I'm all over the map, but that story reminded me back in the mid 2000s, so about 2005, 2006, a buddy of mine, one of my old co-hosts, and I developed a show we called Nashville 90s. And it was something that nobody at the time was doing. Some people were playing 90s country, but we were all in. So what we would do was, it was an hour show, but it was so popular of an hour show that we expanded it to 2 hours. But we would only play hit records from the 90s, right? We'd play the Watermelon Crawls, the Boot Scootin' Boogies, the Dust on the Bottle. And we'd air it, we'd pre-record it, and then it would air Sunday nights. I mean, to the point where we had affiliates picking it up and all this other stuff. So we would always just interview 90s stars or people that came through that had a connection to 90s music or what have you. And we had everybody on. We had, we had Tracy Lawrence, we had Reba, we had Garth, we had Brooks and Dunn. I mean, everybody. And Tracy Lawrence actually flew in and played our inaugural. We did a inaugural concert, first ever Nashville 90s show. And at the end of the night, he just wanted to sing covers. So we got up there, and we had all been drinking all night. And I'll never forget, and we don't have a picture of it. I might have a picture of it. But I'm standing next to Tracy. He's got his arm around me, and we're singing Amarillo by Morning. And he leans in and he goes, I don't remember the opening lines. You got to sing it. I'm like, okay. So I'm singing it with Tracy Lawrence. And then we're going back and forth. But you reminded me when you asked me the question, who was somebody that you kind of had an issue with, right? A celebrity. Mary Chapin Carpenter. 90s. Big hits like I Feel Lucky, The Bug, Down at the Twist and Shout. Mary Chapin Carpenter was going to be a guest on our program. And so, like you, they contact us and they say, here are the things she's promoting. Here are the things we would like, to talk about, not talk about, whatever else. Okay, great. And so we have her on. And so we're getting ready to record it. And her handler calls us on the hotline and she says, all right, she's ready to go. How long is this going to last? And we said 25 minutes tops, Okay, great. She's promoting this, would like to talk about this, steer clear of this. And one more thing, just so you know, because people tend to forget, her first name is Mary Chapin, which I didn't know.
Right.
I thought that was her middle name. And I'm like, really? She's like, yeah, her first name is Mary Chapin. Okay. Which I probably should have known, but I didn't. So we get her on the air with us, and she's happy-go-lucky. We're talking about stuff. We're joking, whatever. Well, my co-host is across. I'm at the board, and he's over on the seat on the other side. And he goes to tell her a question. Without even thinking, he says, so, Mary, back in 1991, and he asks this question. There's silence on the line. She doesn't answer. And he kind of looks at me and he goes, hello? Hello? And pretty soon you hear her go, it's Mary Chapin. Doesn't answer the question, corrects him. And he goes, oh, I'm so sorry, Mary Chapin. So then he asks the question again. So we hurry up and hit the mute button and we're bawling. We're laughing so hard. So now we're trying to make it a game, how many times we can get her to say it's Mary Chapin. Right? So now, we're just asking for it.
Yeah.
So then I start asking her questions. I'm saying, hey, Mary Chapin, blah, 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 whatever. So then we go back to Craig, and Craig goes, so Mary, and she right away, Mary Chapin. And her whole demeanor changed. So we had her on for about 25 minutes, but they never called us and reprimanded us or anything. And we just said, sorry, whatever.
Yeah.
But what was that?
No, it was just funny.
I've only been told twice never to talk about something. One was Juliana Huff when she was dating Ryan Seacrest. She was on Dancing with the Stars at the time, just came out with her first country song. She came through, and one of my dearest friends in the business was her rep, thank God. And right before we went on the air, she came up like she was giving me a hug. Like, so good to see you. And she gives me a hug and she leans in and she goes, do not ask about him. I go, what? She goes, do not ask about him. And I'm like, but that's part of the fun. She goes, I know. Do not ask about him. I'm like, okay. So I couldn't ask about him. Ryan Seacrest. I don't know how long they dated. The second time, I wasn't told I couldn't, but I tried not to. And I told my friend who was the manager that I was going to try my best not to do it, is when I interviewed Allie Colleen on my video cast. You know who Allie Colleen is?
No.
A new artist, Garth Brooks' daughter.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
And so Allie was on, and everything that I had read about Allie was, which she should. She wants to build her career on her merit, her songwriting, her singing. She doesn't want to be Garth Brooks' daughter. So we talked when I did this video cast, some of these, everybody would say, I'll give you 10 minutes, and they would end up being an hour and a half, right? Because they'd be like you and me, just BSing. Yeah. And they turned out great. And I never kept these people on longer than they wanted to. They were the ones that instigated it, that we say on. Yep. So Allie and I talked for well over an hour, and I never brought up her dad once, never brought up my love for her dad, which I'll show you here real quick. Grew up listening to him and just love him and met him and all this other stuff. And then pretty soon she brings him up. So then she talked about growing up with her dad and all this other, and it was great, man. It was cool. So sometimes when you're asking these questions stuff, sometimes it leads you down the right path to where you're going to go, Obviously, calling Mary Chapin Mary does not lead you down that path, but yeah.
Well, it's kind of, I had talked about it a little earlier, because I talked to John Paycheck, not long ago at all, maybe beginning of the summer. And, his PR team was like, you can talk about Johnny Paycheck, but don't spend too much time on it. Like, you can acknowledge it.
But
Just
what? Sorry, you cut out there.
uh, they told us not to spend too much time talking about Johnny. You can bring it up, whatever. Just don't make the interview about Johnny Paycheck.
Right.
So I was like, fine. No, but same kind of thing, right? I had brought it up, just a quick little question, and then he went and took it and just kept going and telling
Right.
stories about his father and all these
Right.
things. And I
Yeah.
was like, well, I didn't do it.
Yeah.
He did it. I just opened the door.
Yeah. I'll tell you a funny of all these video casts I did during the because originally back to my TikTok Cassidy Country, when I started that and kind of found the niche, my first idea was, well, I'm just going to go back and play all these interviews online. But I'm like, some of them are outdated. I interviewed BJ Thomas, who passed away now, and all this other stuff. And I'm like, you know what? No, I'm just going to keep those, and maybe I'll post them again at another time. But I also I wanted to do all country artists or big names like Don McLean of American Pie. And I'm like, you know what? I got to get some more like popular people or people in the people that people know. So I got the opportunity to interview Red Green. Do you know who that guy is? So I don't know how old you are, but there used to be a show called Red Green out of Canada, which I didn't watch. It was on, but I hardly ever watched it. But I have friends who love it. He's from Canada, and basically, he fixes everything with duct tape, and you'll have to look him up. Red Green,
Okay.
very popular. But the whole story is that many people believe that Tim Allen ripped off his shtick for Home Improvement. So if you go back and watch Home Improvement, it's Tim Allen doing this manly stuff. Everything can be fixed with duct tape. That's his whole shtick, right? That was his comedy bit, and then that was his show. And so I'm interviewing Red Green. Again, hardly ever watched the show. I literally did a 10-minute quick bio, what I need to know, and let him run with the interview. When they run with it, it's always better because then you can come up with other questions.
Yeah.
So I'm interviewing him, and he's like literally on his set at his Canadian home. Like he's got his kayak behind him. He's got his fishing hat on, and we're just having a great rapport and all this stuff. And towards the end of it, probably I'd say 3/4 of the way through, I said, Red, and it's not his real name, obviously, but he goes by Red Green. And I said, Red, can I ask you? I said, so what's the whole story? I said, did Tim really rip you off? I said, or maybe I don't know how I phrased it. I didn't accuse him of anything, but I brought up Tim Allen and Home Improvement and the similarities between Red's show and whatever. And his whole demeanor changed. Like his face changed. And I'm looking at him like you and I are looking right now, right? And I could feel his stare through my computer. And he says, nope. He says, I've always been doing my own thing. That's all he says. And I go, well, yeah, that's right. I said, you're such an original. And about that point in our conversation that had been jovial, I don't know if he did it on purpose or if it was just accident or he knew what he was doing. So I'm starting to wrap up the interview because I know that he was a little upset. He just goes like this. And then he looks right at me. And I'm like, well, it's a pleasure, talking to you. And I'll never forget that. I was like, no, I'm good. I don't need to interview old Red Green again.
Yeah. And
because it's a little different, my years of doing it on the radio, it's a little different because you can hang up the phone and say, oh, we had a bad connection. But when you're right there with them, I was interviewing David Nail. This is when David got out of music for a while. And I had pestered him for months. I'm like, I knew David, back in the day, I'll bring up stuff that, a lot of people don't know and all this stuff. And they're like, fine, we'll get him, whatever. So David and I are talking, and David's a big advocate for mental health. That's why he kind of stepped back from music about mental health and anxiety and all this stuff. So he and I are talking about all this stuff, and he's talking about all these causes that he's really into and behind and all that stuff, right? So I'm listening to him, and we are, I kid you not, we're 40 minutes into this thing, right? I look at my computer, I never hit record.
Oh.
So I'm figuring out, okay, how am I going to do this? And he's in the middle of telling me this story about how he's doing this thing. So I kind of grab my mouse and I'm kind of going, and I grab my mouse and I hit record. Well, what happens on Zoom? There's a voice that says, meeting recording in progress. It literally is like the loudest thing that comes across is he's in the middle of something and he stops and he looks and he goes, what was that? And quickly I go, you know what? I said, it's easier for me to edit. I'll be able to edit that first 40 minutes. Just continue. Sorry, I just wanted to switch it over to a different just to have more, So then I end up with only like a 10-minute interview with David Nail, and I had to split it up, and I had to do a whole nother video of me introing it going, well, this is what we talked about. And then I say, well, because I kind of forgot to hit record and I felt so stupid, but what are you going to do?
Yeah. Now, is there anybody you haven't interviewed that's still with us that you would like to interview?
Is there anybody I haven't, you cut out there again, anybody that's with us still that I have not interviewed that I would like to interview? Probably. I've interviewed Alan. I've interviewed Garth a number of times. I've interviewed Randy Travis. I've interviewed Dolly. Shoot. I think a great interview, I've never interviewed him. I've met him. I think a great interview would be Vince Gill.
Yeah.
I introed one of his shows one year. This is about 6 years ago. And I got to the venue early. They had called me and asked if I would bring him on stage. I said, yeah. So I got the venue early before they opened the doors for the crowd. It was in this beautiful theater. And I'm just walking around backstage, and it's super dark back in these long hallways. And then you'd walk out on stage and the lights were bright. So I'm just kind of, and I'm all by myself. I mean, it's something straight out of a horror movie. It's dead silent, dark. And I see a silhouette walking towards me. And I'm just kind of biding my time, like maybe I shouldn't be back here. And pretty soon I see, and it's a guy carrying a huge wedge. And there's a door to the stage. And I go, oh, sorry. And I open it up. And I said, let me get that for you. He said, thanks. And it's Vince. He was carrying his own wedge out to his microphone. I'm like, oh, shit, that's Vince Gill. But I didn't stop and talk to him. I'm sure there are quite a few. I was just telling the story the other day how I've been to the Opry a number of times. And I wish I'd had the wherewithal in the mid-90s as I'm standing stage right as a guest to realize the legends that were standing right next to me that we no longer have, right? So now I share these stories of these people, and I wish I'd have known that was them standing right next to me, Porter Wagner and all these other ones. And I think I knew who Porter was, but like Billy Newman and a bunch of these guys that had minor hits back in the 60s, because I'd love to sit and talk to them. I got one year when Dirks played the Opry, he sent a car for me to pick me up, a Lincoln Town car. And I was his guest. And it used to be, I don't know if they do this now, but on the Opry, they used to have benches behind the band where you could sit behind and watch from behind the band. And so that's where he said, just sit on one of those benches. Okay, great. But I pulled up in the back of this Lincoln Town car, and before I even hit the handle to get out, door opens up. I'm like, I live in right here, right? So I get out and I stand up, and immediately I stand up, my eyes catch somebody that opened the door, and I look down, and it's little Jimmy Dickens.
Jesus Christ.
And he says, hello, son, what is your name? I said, holy shit, you're little Jimmy Dickens. He goes, that's what they tell me. I said, Mr. Jim, I said, my name is Ritch Cassidy. I said, it is a pleasure to meet you. He says, well, Richie, come on in. Welcome to the greatest show on earth. It is called the Grand. I mean, he does this whole spiel out in the parking lot back in the artist entrance. The greatest spiel on earth, the Grand Ole Opry. And the whole time he's smoking a cigarette. And so he walks me to the artist entrance. Hey, he's dressed to the nines. He's in his nudie suit and the whole thing. He's got his cigarette. We're talking, and I have a camera with this before cell phone cameras and everything, but I have my camera with me, and whatever. And he asked me why I was there, and I told him Dirks and all this other stuff, and he says, "Well, son, have a wonderful time at the Grand Ole Opry and all this." And he takes his last puff and he puts it out in the ashtray, and he says, "And do me a favor, would you? If you see my beautiful wife in there, please tell her. Please make sure you don't tell her that I was doing this." He says, "I've been hiding it for a few years." Makes a joke, and he kind of nudges me, and I walk inside. But yeah, little Jimmy. I mean, that was it. Blew me away. And then that night, Dirks made me feel like a rock star because he gets done with his show. He played the early show and the late show, and so I went to both of them. So the late show, he gets done, and after it's over, I'm just going back to his dressing room to tell him thank you so much. I appreciate it, that I was going to bounce out, And he says, "Well, come back to the green room. We're just hanging out." I said, "Okay." So I walk back there to the green room and sit down, and it's Dirks, a couple of girls, because he wasn't married yet. And I'm not saying like groupies or like just a couple of females were in there. And then a young guy, one of the girls was sitting by this young guy on a couch, and he looked familiar to me, but I didn't know who he was. And so we're all just sitting there talking music and talking hockey, I think, because Dirks is a big hockey guy and everybody's talking. And in the middle of the conversation, he says, "Rich," he said, "I'm so sorry I haven't introduced you." He said, "This is so-and-so." And one of the girls was one of his merch, whatever. "This is so-and-so." And she was with the young guy that was on the couch. And he says, "I'm sure you know Casey." I'm like, I don't know if I know Casey. I said, "All right, stand up." And I said, "Hi, Casey. Nice to meet you, Ritch Cassidy." And he says, "Hi, Casey Kane," which Casey Kane was NASCAR driver Casey Kane, who no longer races NASCAR. And I go, "Casey, it's nice to meet you, my man," like this. And I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, holy crap, it's Casey Kane, right? So we talk for a few minutes, and then we're leaving. And if I'm lying, I'm dying. It's 100% true. We walk out. As we walk out of the green room, Dirks is grabbing his guitar and stuff because he's going home because he's got to leave for a show or whatever. And Casey grabs me. For as well as Dirks talked me up in that green room, Casey goes, "Can I get a picture with you?" So me and Casey Kane are in the hallway of the Grand Ole Opry, and I take a picture. I have a copy of it. They sent me a copy of it. It's me and Casey Kane in the back of the Opry. And I'm like, there you go.
Yeah, that's awesome. What you've done and what you're doing is just so, you know, I this sounds probably bad, but like
Oh,
I
you're
hope
cutting out.
that I
Go
was
ahead.
just saying I hope this probably sounds bad, but I'm hoping that there's a younger generation, younger than me, that are seeing your TikToks and appreciating what you're doing.
Well, I think I know what you said. It cut out there, but again, I have been, and I tell you, if you have time, I'll tell you one other quick, real funny story.
All the time in the world.
Again, I say on my TikTok lives all the time, my wife is like, "Please tell these stories to somebody else. I've heard them 100 times." So I was a guest to go to the CMA Awards in 1999, the very famous 1999 CMA Awards, where Alan Jackson walked off because they wouldn't let George Jones perform. So I was there, and I met George Jones the day before. Was the first time I ever met him. George walked up to me and said, "Damn it, son, you need to eat something." That was the first thing George Jones ever said to me, and I met him a couple times after that. So we got to the Opry about 2 hours early before the CMAs started. And one of my friends, who is higher up in the business than I am, said, "Come on, we're going to go down early. We'll just go backstage, and we just hang out. Artists will all show up." And I'm like, that's what I'm talking about, right? It's always one of these things, which I'm sure you know, when you walk backstage at the Grand Ole Opry where the biggest stars in country music are going to be, you better act like you've been there. No fangirling, no autographing, no nothing. Like you're there as a peer with them. Okay. So we go back there, and slowly some of these artists start showing up. Like I saw Terry Clark come in, and Vince Gill come in, and Ricky Skaggs come in, and all these stars come in. And all of a sudden, I feel like I should not be back here. So I just start walking the hallways, and there's dressing rooms open up, and there's Tim and Faith sitting in a dressing room all by themselves talking, and she's wiping his face off and all this stuff. And I'm like, who the hell am I and where am I at, right? So so finally, backstage at the Opry, there's a T, or there was at the time. It's a T. So there's a long hallway, and then there's a hallway that leads to the stage. Well, right at that T, there was a case, like a road case, like for some equipment. And I just thought in my mind right away, I had lost my buddy. By this time, it's elbows to, you know what, people everywhere. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to stand right here by this road case, lean up against it. I'm going to soak it all in. So I remember to talk about it on the radio and tell all my friends about it. So I'm just soaking it all in, watching everybody. Well, about that time, these 3 guys come over with paper plates with a steak and like pasta and whatnot on them. And they said, hey, do you mind if we sit these down on here and eat? There's no place to sit down. I said, yeah, I don't care. So they sit down. So I get to talking to them, and I'm like, I recognize them, but I don't know where I recognize them from. So they're all talking amongst themselves. And I'm sitting there watching, and all of a sudden it hits me. About a week prior to that, on MTV, I had watched a documentary about the newest, hottest band in the world, NSYNC. That was them. And so it was Chris Kirkpatrick, JC Chazé, however you say his last name, and Lance Bass. And I have a picture of me and Lance Bass right here from that night. So I got talking to them, you know, whatever. And Justin Timberlake wasn't there, or was not with us. They were there at the awards. If you go back and watch them, they sang "God Must Have Had a Little More Time on You" with Alabama. So we get talking to them, right? Again, act like you've been there. Act like you're supposed to be there. So we're talking about country music, and about that time, somebody runs into my shoulder, because it's so packed. And I don't think anything of it. It's just this short person just hits me. And I turn around and look, and she turns around and she says, "Sorry, boys." And she giggles. Well, it's Shania Twain. Right? And so in the back of my mind, I'm going, holy crap, that's Shania Twain, right? Pretty soon, JC Chazé from the biggest band in the world, NSYNC, looks at me and goes, "Do you know Shania Twain?" I'm like, well, yeah, sure I do. You know, act like you've been there. I had never met her in my life. And he goes, "Oh my God, I'd love to meet her." And I go, "Well, come on, let's go." So he puts his fork down like this. So he follows me, and we make our way through. We find her name on her dressing room. You know, there's people just everywhere. And I knock on the door, and it says, "Come on in." So I open it up. Here's Shania comes walking. I go, "Hey, Shania, good to see you." I said, blah, 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 whatever. I said, "Real quick, I just want you to meet my good friend JC from NSYNC. He's a really big fan of yours." And she was like, "Oh my God, I love NSYNC." I'm like, "JC, Shania, JC." And he walks in. They shut the door, and I walk back, and I go, nobody will believe it.
Right. And like that, but that's exactly how you have to do it. If you act like you're supposed to be somewhere, nobody will ever question it.
It was one of the most random things in my life. It truly was. And then later that night at the after party, I have a picture of a bunch of us in radio, and it's like me and like 3 other people, Tracy Bird, Clint Black, and then Lance Bass leaning in the middle of all of us. And back in there, you had to get your pictures developed. And so I waited to get all those pictures developed, and I'm showing those to all my friends, and they just couldn't believe it. So it's been wild.
That's awesome.
So.
Now, I have a quick question for you about radio before we wrap this all up and all that. Now, from when you started radio to now, what has been, other than Spotify and Apple and all that, what do you think the biggest detriment to to radio has been?
To radio?
Yeah.
Biggest detriment to radio? Well, number one, it sounds bad for me saying loyalty, because I was with the same company for 23 years, and I was downsized twice. I went back to start mornings on a classic country station, and then I got downsized again. And the second time I got downsized, I said, I'm never going back to corporate radio ever again. That's when I ended up on the network, and my life couldn't be better. So but it's just budgets. And I think that, you know, in the advent of streaming and podcasts and things like that, people have so many options as to where to listen. The goal of a radio person like me and all the radio stations I'm on about 100 radio stations across the country, is just to be real, just to be endearing and connect with them in some way, you know, and not be something you're not, because too many radio people try to be this big star, and it works for some people, and other people it's just like, if you're just yourself, you know, like you would be a star on radio because you're you, right? So once I figured that out, like, then it all snapped. And I think now with the downsizing of corporate radio, it's not what anybody is not doing. It's the corporate looking ahead going, okay, there's more money to be had in podcasts. Everybody's got a phone and this and the apps and whatnot. But radio is still the number one source for people to get new music, because you don't know what you're going to download on Spotify unless you hear it on your local radio station. Or if you hear on your local radio station that there's a concert coming to town and you don't know who this person is, but you go see them, well, it's all because of radio. You're hearing that, and then you're going to go download their music. So I don't know that radio will never go away. I just think it needs to figure itself out, because it's not like it used to be. I mean, we used to do contests to give away free T-shirts on the radio. And like we would have 100, like say we'd have 100 T-shirts from our show printed up. Like, and those were hot commodity items, like back in the day. Like, people loved them. We would do live broadcasts to give away free T-shirts to the first 200 people, and there would be 400 people lined up around the block, right? So that was that community. That was that community service. That was that, you know, that one-on-one connection and all that. So it's no fault of the radio people that what they're calling the demise of radio. It's all the suits and the corporates trying to figure out. It's like, and not to get into this whole debate, you know, people are debating, you know, why Stephen Colbert's show is going away, right? Is it political? Is it all this? Is it because he went against CBS? No, it's because late night TV is dying, and advertisers don't see the value in it anymore, because what do people do now when they go to bed? They sit on their phone and they scroll. It's not like me watching Johnny Carson when I was a kid growing up, because you have other options. So the goal of radio, what I do and what other radio jocks do, is you have to give them a reason to make sure to want to tune in to what you're doing, more than your closest friends, more than family. You have to give other people a reason to want to tune in and go, hey, I don't want to miss that, right? And so back 24 years ago, the Blake Shelton interview was one of those, me thinking ahead going, I need to do something different than he's ever heard before, or the radio listeners have heard before. So they just keep coming back, and it's that hamster wheel of, okay, what can I do to reinvent and do all that? So what I hope is a lot of these big corporate radio stations start selling them off, you know, not all of them, but sell off smaller ones. So then local buyers will come in and buy them up and make them hometown radio stations again, because radio will flourish for everybody and advertisers and all that. Like, I could give a whole TED talk on that whole thing, but people say the radio is dying. I don't think it is. I think it's misguided right now, and it's lost as to where it goes from here.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, I can't tell you the last time I turned on the local radio station, but I think you're right.
Yeah. So, man, it's been a crazy world, crazy life. I have been blessed beyond belief, and I knew when I got downsized 5 years ago that I still wanted to do it. It's a blessing that I got asked to be part of this amazing network and of radio stations, and I love it more than I ever have in my life. Now with the advent of TikTok, finding that whole audience of people that are like-minded like me, that love history of country music, that enjoy spending 5 minutes of their day or 6 minutes of their day learning stories about whether it be the Highwaymen or Charlie Rich or, you know, Merle Haggard, whatever the case may be. One of the things I've learned as I've gotten older, and it's really helped me, where I see a lot of radio jocks still aren't in this mindset is what I do for a living is not about me. It's about us. It's about the radio listener. It's about I think I had lost you. So I can't hear I can't hear you. I don't know if it's on my end or your end, but well, maybe we can try this again. Can you hear me now? I can't hear you. Uh-uh. Well, why don't we we'll try to do this again. Like I was telling you in the email, I got a busy couple of months coming up, but maybe kind of after one of the first or second. Oh, I lost you now. There you are.
There you go.
There you are. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it is for me too.
So, but man, I will. I'll shoot you my number.
Yeah.
You call me, text me anytime. We
Perfect.
can keep in touch, and we can set up another time. Like I say, a couple months down the road, maybe do this again and just shoot the breeze. We can
I
go
would love
through
to.
country music stories and whatnot. But it's been a pleasure, and it's been a lot of fun to be a guest.
Same, man. Thanks for coming on, and we'll get together soon and do this again for sure.
Yep, absolutely. We'll connect. I'll send you my number.
All right, Rich. Thanks, buddy.
All right, take care.
Bye. Well, there you have it, everybody. Our conversation with Ritch Cassidy. Rich, again, thank you so much for being here, man. You're the cream of the crop when it comes to storytelling and everything that I love it. I love it. So thank you for being here. Thank all of you for coming in and stopping by and taking the time. Like I said, we got some cool stuff. We got a big announcement coming. So cheers. Be good to each other until we see you next Tuesday. Just be cool with each other, and that's it, man. It's that simple. So we'll see you down the road, guys. See you Tuesday.